Hello, everyone. My name's Heather McKay, and I'm a policy advisor at E3G. And I'm really pleased to welcome you today to this webinar entitled The Future of Professional Bodies in a Net Zero World. So a bit of housekeeping, as you'll have just seen, this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube later. The session will run till 12:30 UK time, so 11 till 12:30, so 1.5-hour session. And there'll be time for an audience Q&A later with our lovely panelists. One more thing, if you do want to tweet about the event, we do have some hashtags for you that one of my colleagues will pop in the chat. So one is hashtag Professionals Climate Charter, and we'd like if you also put the hashtag COP26 as well, together with that. Shall we pop some slides up on the screen? Brilliant. So as a bit of background, COP26 this year in Glasgow is really a landmark moment. And I'm not just saying that because it's where I grew up. This is a session more than 5 years on from Paris, where we're going to take a bit of time to stop take on progress to date, reflect on how we've done, and push for further and faster ambition. This particular COP has seen finance and business put firmly on the agenda. However, in all the noise and flurry, we don't really get a chance to hear from the individuals who actually work in those industries, i.e. the professionals. This event really is a chance for us to hear their perspectives on COP26 and net zero. And we're lucky to have a number of amazing panelists who represent, I believe, a huge number of people working across a variety of industries. I'll introduce those panelists in detail later. Professionals and professional bodies, although they don't often get the limelight they should, will play a critical role in getting us to net zero and informing what the future of work will look like. If we think about achieving net zero, like building a wall, the decarbonisation of different sectors can be thought of like the bricks, and professionals are the mortar. So we need to join up those conversations so we can build a solid foundation, a solid wall for a climate safe future. That's enough from me as an introduction. So I'm going to move on to our brilliant attendees today. We're lucky to have two presentations coming up from some amazing panelists heavily involved both in COP26 and also the Professional Bodies Charter. Firstly, we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Nick Baker. He's the Deputy Director for Business and Engagement at the COP26 unit. And he's kindly joined us today from, I believe, Glasgow, Nick. So perhaps you'll do your best Scottish accent, I'm not sure. Otherwise, I'll hand over to yourself to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Heather. I won't attempt a Scottish accent. I used to, believe it or not, have a very broad one when I was only about 8 years old, because I grew up initially in Aberdeen, but I've lost it now. But yes, you're right. I am sitting in Glasgow, not outside, but I am in the SEC, as you can maybe tell from the image behind me on the wall. So I am at COP26 in Glasgow and have been since Sunday. So as Heather said, I am the Deputy Director for Engagement in the COP26 unit, and my team works with all non-state actors, so businesses, but also civil society organizations, faith organizations, trade unions, youth organizations, and many others on working towards COP and making climate change commitments and tackling climate change across society. And it's a key role because for our team, because our approach to this COP has been, as you're probably aware, to make it an all of society COP. So the idea being that to really deliver on the Paris Agreement, which is a fantastic climate change agreement, so we have one in place, we really need a step change in action, and that involves working right across society. So business working together with government, with civil society organizations, youth organizations, academia, and many others. Now, you're probably familiar with the 4 goals that we're looking to achieve out of COP26, but I'll run through them briefly to start with, just to refresh memories and also kind of give a bit of a stock take of what's gone on, because over the last year and a half to 2 years that we've been preparing for this, because it's been a long time in the preparation, especially with it having been postponed. And COP26 is an event, but climate change obviously doesn't stop with COP26. And then I'll give a bit of a sense of what's been coming out of the last few days of the conference, and it's got off to a great start. We're very pleased with how it's got going. So firstly, with the 4 goals that we're looking to achieve, the first one is keeping this 1.5 degree target alive, a totemic figure of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels of global temperature rises that was set in the Paris Agreement, keeping that alive. And that means further commitments to reduce emissions. And we've been seeing in the build up to this COP and at the event itself, further commitments by governments through their nationally determined contributions to reduce emissions, but also really importantly from businesses as well. So at the end of the day, a lot of these commitments are going to be implemented by companies, by the private sector. So some fantastic commitments being made to reduce emissions. And that's really important because the science tells us that we are not on track for meeting that 1.5 degree target. The IPCC report that came out over the summer, but also the UN's own synthesis report, where they add up all the commitments from governments and see where that puts us on track for, still say that with all the commitments made in the run-up to COP26, we're still on track for a 2.7 degree temperature rise by the end of the century. So we need to do a lot more, even though so much is already being done. And that's what we want to show through the event here in Glasgow, is the momentum, but also that we need to do more. So that's the first goal, keep 1.5 degrees alive. Second is adaptation, and that's a really key focus for those countries and communities and people all around the world who are most affected by climate change impacts. And we've been seeing those really graphically over the course of the last few months with wildfires, floods, and huge storms all around the world. I think it's clear what the impacts are. So helping people adapt to those impacts, build their resilience, whether it's through flood defenses or early warning systems for detecting storms, that kind of thing, or on a smaller scale as well. That's a key focus for our conference here in Glasgow. Third is finance, and to deliver on adaptation, but also mitigation, we really need to increase the flows of finance. So both the quantity of finance available for climate change related issues, but also increasing the accessibility of it. So many projects are small local projects around the world put together by people who find it difficult to access the huge sums that are being put together. So that is a key target, is the $100 billion a year of international climate finance that the international community committed to many years ago, and it hasn't been met up until now. So now we are within touching distance of actually reaching that 100 billion figure. So that's the third goal, is finance. Fourth and final one, and possibly the most important, is collaboration. To achieve all of this, we need to work together, as I was saying, across sectors, so business sectors, industry sectors, but also with governments, NGOs, and others as well. And some specifics to achieve through our collaboration. Firstly, here in Glasgow, through the negotiations, whilst we have a fantastic climate change agreement, the Paris Agreement, not everything was concluded and agreed and finalized in Paris. So there were things that were left still to do, still to be concluded, such as Article 6 on a carbon trading system. So we're looking to finalize the Paris rulebook here in Glasgow through the negotiations process, but also accelerate collaboration more broadly to achieve the other three goals that I've set out. And the road to COP26 has been very busy. So we've been fortunate in having the G7 presidency, and our Italian partners have had the G20 presidency, which has really helped drive momentum in the build up to this conference. So we've seen some really good commitments being made around the G7 on further climate finance from Germany, Canada, and Japan. More again through the G20, kind of further commitments by G20 countries to reduce emissions. The UN General Assembly in September as well saw the US increase its commitment on climate finance, which was fantastic. And some really important other events organized by some of our youth partners. So for example, the Conference of Youth, which took place in Glasgow right before COP26 started. So a big declaration put together by young people from around the world on what they wanted to come out of COP26. And our Italian partners organized the Youth for Climate around the G20 as well, around the pre-COP. Again, producing a very strong statement from young people of what they expected to come or wanted to come out of the conference here in Glasgow. And coming, so that brings me on to where we are now and kind of day 4 or 5 of the conference here in Glasgow. The weather is good, it's set fair for us, and we're pretty happy with how things have been going so far. So you'll have seen, I mean, blanket news coverage, which is great, and some really important things coming out. So a lot of focus on the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forests and Land Use. So with 119 leaders signing up to that, covering 88% of the world's forests. So a commitment to reverse forest loss and halt deforestation, which is fantastic. Again, one of our key COP themes is protecting nature and stopping deforestation. Secondly, a global methane pledge, which is really important for reducing emissions. As you'll have seen, as everyone is aware, kind of the impact that methane has, much more so actually than carbon dioxide. So very important progress on methane. On finance, I mean, particularly on the private sector side, we've now got $130 trillion worth of assets aligned through the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, so GFANZ. So obviously I was talking earlier about the role of public money in delivering for climate change, this 100 billion figure, but actually that's a small kind of amount compared to what is needed, and actually the public money is needed to leverage private sector finance. So the 130 trillion private sector money through GFANZ is a fantastic achievement. 450 firms contributing to that from 45 countries. On other things, so on adaptation, there's been a big increase in number of the countries taking part in the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment. So at the moment, it was just been trialing through one country, but aiming to ramp that up to 25 countries by 2025. The multilateral development banks are aligning their funding with the Paris Agreement as well. And then some specifics on collaboration. There's very few countries left to ratify the Paris Agreement, but we've got one of the few remaining ones has now ratified it here in Glasgow. So Iraq has ratified the Paris Agreement, which brings now the number of countries or number of parties to it having ratified from 100 to 193. So out of 197 parties to the Paris Agreement. So we're nearly there with all of them. And then a really good specific example on kind of bringing finance and mitigation together on a deal called Eskom, which is named after the South African power company, which I'm reliably told is the world's heaviest or highest producing or highest emitting electricity company. So international partnership put together to provide $8.5 billion of funding to support that company in its decarbonization. So a really good specific example of bringing together international collaboration on a financial thing, on a financial commitment that will help reduce emissions. So there's a lot coming out of the conference so far. It's been a great start, but there's a lot more to do. As everyone is aware, as I was saying earlier about the effects that we're seeing of climate change, they're here and now. It's urgent. We need to act and need to act at scale, and that's what we're aiming to do here. Clearly, COP26, climate change doesn't finish with COP26, and actually our UK presidency started on the first day of the conference and will last until the next COP. So we will be looking to build on the momentum generated from this conference throughout the course of our presidency. One of the things that we'll be focusing on is continuing sign-ups for the Race to Zero, and it was excellent to have a huge number of new members announced at the beginning of this conference. So we now have 5,231 businesses that are signed up and members of the Race to Zero. So a 700% increase since it was brought together back in June last year. And I think, Heather, I will stop there. I'm afraid I can't stay on for the full length of your call, but I hope it's a great discussion, and I hope that was useful.
Well, thanks, Nick. I think I can speak for the panelists and myself and the audience when we say it was a really interesting update you provided on the COP, and also the progress to date that we've achieved in moving business towards net zero. It's been really tremendous, actually. And I think what's really nice is you've also helpfully teed us up for our next contribution with Colin Church, the CEO of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining. Try to say that one fast, 6 times in a row. And he's going to provide a little bit of an update to us on quite where we see the role of professionals in continuing the progress to date we've seen on net zero. Colin has been instrumental in bringing the professional body's climate action charters to life, and he'll be able to really give us some detail on what exactly we've achieved to date, and also what's next on the agenda for the charter. So Colin, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to share my slides now. Okie doke. I hope everyone can see a nice white screen at the moment. So indeed, I've been asked to say a little bit about why professional bodies got together to create the Climate Action Charter, how we did it, and what it is. And really, I'm trying to answer the question, why should professional bodies act on climate change? And I guess there are several different reasons why I think we should all be acting on climate change. First of all, and perhaps rather obviously, humanity is changing the climate, and so everybody needs to do something about it. But also, actually, our members expect it of us. And here's just some examples of some findings from a recent employee expectations report, talking about the extent to which employees and therefore people in general perhaps are starting to care more and more about environmental issues. And you can see that this is particularly strong amongst the younger generations, but actually it's pretty much across different generations. And there's quite a global spread of it as well. And the solutions to decarbonisation require multiple expertises. And you could perhaps use the example that Heather was giving beforehand of a wall with mortar and so on and so forth. But there are lots of different elements that need to work together, whether it's science and engineering and education and IT and finance and law and health and so on. And of course, that's what professional bodies cover. They bring together those expertises. The current workforce also needs upskilling. And this is a model of the labour force in the US in 2050. And what you can really see is, first of all, that the vast majority of people who will be in the workforce in 2050 have already been born, but actually a very large proportion of them are already in work. And so we can make many, many changes to the education system that will not necessarily touch those people who are already in work. They need to be upskilled. And of course, that's something that professional bodies are doing all of the time. through what we call continuing professional development, or CPD. I think another important reason why professional bodies should be active in the climate space is that, generally speaking, professionals are trusted. And this is the Ipsos Mori Veracity Index for all professions. This is a UK survey, they do it on a regular basis. But what it shows you is that a lot of the people that we would recognise as professionals are highly trusted, and perhaps are better placed to convey some of the messages that need to be conveyed, if indeed we are going to see the kinds of actions that we need. And then the final thing, I think, is it's really important to realise just how influential the voices of professional bodies can be. And there's different reasons for this. The number of people involved, 13 million in the UK, almost 1 million in represented by ACOP, for example, in Australasia. And it's a way of bringing together impartial evidence, authoritative evidence that isn't tied to commercial interests, and can therefore be really helpful to public policymakers in making policy, to the media in understanding issues. So I hope I have demonstrated to you that it is essential for professional bodies to be engaged in this space. So what happened? Well, a couple of years, 18 months or so ago, there was a bit of a conversation that was kicked off by our hosts at AE3G, looking at how professional bodies might be active in this space. And this resulted in the formation of a working group that brought together a few of us to try and think what we might do. And very quickly, we decided that the thing to do was to look at some form of a charter to bring together our different interests. And we had a number of conversations with more and less members involved, came up with different iterations of a draft, and finally narrowed it down to 3 main commitments. And I'm just going to bring them up for you now. The first one is really to help our members understand what they need to do in order to both take action on climate change, but also to situate that in the context of the wider UN Sustainable Development Goals. What we don't want to do is to solve the climate crisis at the expense of either social progress or indeed wider environmental damage. So it really does need to be in that SDG context. So that first commitment is to take action to, as we say, chart the path to sustainability for our members. And on the screen, you've got a few of the things that underlie that for us. The second element is to speak with a unified voice to and with professional bodies, government and the public. And that goes to that point I was saying earlier about having the scope, the potential to be a trusted voice, bringing together strong evidence. And I think that's a really important role for professional bodies going forward. I suspect others have it too. So IOM3 is a body governed by a Royal Charter. And in that Royal Charter, we are told that we are expected to provide advice to ministers on all issues to do with materials, minerals and mining. And for us, that means very clearly that we must be engaged in that process of providing evidence to policymakers. And then the third commitment is empower and inspire our members to drive sustainable growth. And that is really a lot about this upskilling, reskilling, making sure that we are doing the right thing for our members so that they can understand what they need to do. But it also encompasses doing the right thing ourselves with our own operations. Many professional bodies, in terms of the size of the sort of the estate or the employees, are really small, small businesses. But nonetheless, we need to make sure that we are taking action to make sure our own houses are in order. So that's a brief run through of why I think taking action is important, how we got to design the charter as a way of bringing together the importance of taking action and setting out some of the things that we think could be done. So the question is, what can you do? You're sitting watching this, you've got a bit of an insight into what's going on in COP, you've got a bit of an insight into why professional bodies should be taking action, you've got a bit of insight into how we got the professional body charter up. Join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. I mean, really compelling remarks. And I think hopefully we can share the link to our very new shiny website in the chat, where you can find a page which you can explore and try and become a supporter and join us, as Colin has said. And I also wanted to pick up on something else you said, Colin, about doing the right thing. think that is, everyone in this room, I assume, I'd hope, agrees that acting on climate change is doing the right thing, but also it's doing the pragmatic thing and it's doing the business sensible thing. I would agree too. I think that there are opportunities tomorrow that we'll only be able to access if we all start greening our businesses and greening our professions towards net zero. Now, hopefully the lovely panelists we have will be covering similar themes in their presentations. We are now moving on to the panel discussion aspect of our session today. So two things. We have, I know my helpful little colleagues have popped in the chat a Slido link. So if you want to pop your questions for the panelists in there, you're welcome to do so throughout the presentations. If you are like me and a bit of a Luddite, we also do have the Zoom Q&A function. So please also feel free to use that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ethny Childs. So she is the Engagement and Communities Lead at the Institution of Environmental Sciences. So she manages IES communities, which are member-led special interest groups, and also has been heavily involved in COP26 preparations over the course of the year. So Ethny, over to you to hear your perspectives on the future of professional bodies.
Thanks very much, Heather. I'm really happy to be here today. So as you mentioned, I'm Engagement and Communities Lead at the Institution of Environmental Sciences, or the IES. The IES is a professional body representing the full spectrum of environmental disciplines, spanning fields as diverse as marine science, air quality, land condition, anywhere where environmental work is underpinned by science. I'm delighted to be here today to support the professional body's Climate Action Charter. We really recognise the importance of the initiative for supporting transformative change and have been involved since its inception, playing an active role in the working group drafting the Charter text, and are now, of course, a signatory. The environmental profession will be an integral part of addressing the interlinked crises facing our society, from biodiversity loss to public health issues to climate change. Addressing these challenges will require a transformation of our society and economy to be regenerative and zero carbon. We will need to rethink the way we design, produce, market and distribute goods and services and help embed complementary social and cultural behaviours in a just way. If we are to achieve zero carbon, all sectors must be involved. So multi and cross-disciplinary working and knowledge sharing will be vital to ensure that the relative expertise is being tapped into. And this needs to span international borders as well. This Climate Action Charter is a vital first step towards enabling collaboration and as well as a shared vision, not just within professional bodies, but across the professions. Speaking directly to members or professionals themselves, membership of a professional body is an essential step for helping to drive change in the sector you work in. And there are multiple ways that members can influence and support change through their professional body. Ultimately, professional bodies are there to support and amplify their members' voices. Therefore, by engaging with your professional body and fellow members, you can work to develop a shared narrative as to how to drive change in your respective sector. Professional bodies also hold a unique position in terms of their convening power, being linked to professionals, employers, policymakers, educational institutes, all of which often span multiple disciplines. Therefore, members should utilise these links to facilitate multidisciplinary working and elicit change as a collective through science-based decision-making. And a reminder that you can start this journey early on. Many professional bodies have membership levels for students as well as graduates, and there are also dedicated early career networks where you can access tailored membership service and network with other early career professionals. Engaging with professional bodies early on is a great way of not only building valuable skills, but also helping to enact change through your professional body and influencing their work. It can sometimes be a challenge for young professionals to be heard in this space. They can occupy junior positions in companies, and more senior members can sometimes be dismissive of their viewpoints. But professional bodies and campaign groups are often keen to hear their voices in recognition that it's the future that our current decisions impact. Young people often have idealism and energy, two of the factors that are needed to accelerate the pace of change. And us as professional bodies, we really need your input to work towards solutions. As a young professional myself working in the environmental sector, engaging and building networks has been invaluable for supporting positive change and getting new opportunities in this space. As I speak, I'm up in Scotland for COP26 in the Blue Zone, where I'm working to promote our manifesto for transformative change, which sets out 54 recommendations on what is needed for COP26. Much of my journey in this space has been dependent upon the conversations I've had and the networks I've tapped into. By taking part in discussions with people in a range of sectors, you can build up knowledge in different areas and have serendipitous conversations that lead to new ideas and activities. So please do engage with your professional body, with your peers in the sector, whatever your level of seniority, and you will be part of the solution. And as a vital first step, push for your professional body to sign up to the Charter if it's not yet done so. This Charter really is a great mode of action for galvanising the professions to push forward climate action. Many professional bodies also have communities or special interest groups where you can work directly with them on key topics and issues. For example, here at the IES, our work has been driven by our COP26 communities, and this was focused on championing the work of experts and evidence around climate change. Groups such as these are really important vessels for facilitating discussions and for pushing action through your professional body. Key to each area of work has been maximising the use of the convening power of professional bodies, as well as collaboration and communication, as Nick, our first speaker, said. And the overriding message from all of our activities has been the need to reduce siloed working, and the Charter very much fits with this ethos. The rhetoric surrounding the need for systems thinking and systemic change has now been around for a while, and I would really like to see this Charter catalysing innovative ways of facilitating knowledge sharing between the professions. As environmental professionals, we're evangelists for net zero, but we can't help to understand all the structural, technological, and cultural challenges that each sector faces, and the multitude of solutions that the sector is able to bring to the table. The scale of the challenge to meet climate ambitions can make it seem insurmountable, but the truth is that each profession holds a little bit of the puzzle. Hopefully, this Charter can play a role in bringing these puzzle pieces together and building holistic and coherent plan for transformative change, which will hopefully act as a catalyst and help to make this COP one where we move from pledges to plans. Thanks very much.
Well, I think that was rather rousing. So thank you so much for that. And I know I've got a couple of questions up my head for you already when we get to the panel discussion. We're now going to move back to a speaker that we've heard from before. So Colin, as well as being the CEO of the Institute of Minerals and Mining, is also involved in green thinking more broadly, as well as he is the chair of the Green Alliance Circular Economy Task Force, and also was previously at the Chartered Institution of Waste Management as well. So Colin, I would love to hear your perspectives and your experience on the role for professionals in getting us to net zero.
Thanks very much indeed. The first thing I wanted to say was to heartily endorse everything that Ethny just said. I thought that, Ethny, you did a fantastic exposition of why professionals should be concerned and be engaged. That was brilliant. In terms of the perspective of, if you like, an engineering institution, which is what IOM3 primarily is, we have as one of our objectives to support professionals in materials, minerals and mining, be heroes of the transition to a low carbon resource efficient society and not villains. Why? Well, I guess in many respects, it's for the same reasons I set out in my earlier presentation. First of all, because it's the right thing to do. And secondly, because it's what people expect. But actually for my members, it's even more than that. There is no transition, no just transition to a low carbon resource efficient society without dealing with resources, materials, stuff, things. Fundamentally, we're looking to move from a society and an economy that's powered by fossil fuels to one that's powered by metals and minerals. Effectively, if you look at the technologies that we're looking at, whether it's batteries or solar panel, frankly, even if it's nuclear or fission or fusion, you know, materials are fundamental to all of those. And those materials have to come from somewhere. There is a phrase that my members use quite often: if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. So we do need to be very, very conscious of the fact that we need to be extracting material from the planet in order to meet this climate challenge. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't trash the planet at the same time. Otherwise, we're just creating the same problem from a different perspective. So the importance of doing it right and doing it properly cannot be overstated, I think. We also have in our membership people who've got huge experience and expertise in extracting fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas, for example. And you might say, well, how does this resonate with them? And I think for them, one of the key things is, first of all, the transferability of the skill sets that they've got. If you know how to build an offshore oil platform, then you're a long way along the route of knowing how to build a platform for offshore wind. If you know how to drill a well for gas and oil, you're a long way down the road of knowing how to drill to find a place to put carbon dioxide for carbon storage. So there are a lot of transferable skills here. And more broadly, I would say, across engineering as a whole, we have a shortage of engineers in the UK and more widely across the globe. We cannot afford to say, you're a nasty, dirty engineer because you deal with something we don't like anymore, go away. We absolutely need to use those skills as part of this transition to a low carbon and resource efficient society. So resources, materials, stuff is fundamental. How we get it out of the ground, how we transform it into usable material, how we transport it, all of that must be done in an environmentally and socially sensible and sensitive way, because otherwise we won't meet our climate goals, or we'll do it in a way that causes even more problems for our children and our children's children. So professionals in materials, minerals and mining are fundamental to the transition, but they are not exclusively fundamental to the transition. They absolutely need to be engaged with lawyers and accountants and financiers and environmental scientists and so on and so forth, because it's a system, it's a big, difficult system that we're trying to shift here. And professionals working together have to be the solution. And if professionals don't work together, there isn't a solution. So why do I think it matters? I think I've made that quite clear. It's a really important thing for my members. I think it's absolutely vital for humanity. And we all get on with it, please.
Thanks so much, Colin. Really, really interesting remarks there. And I think the interplay between things like human rights and net zero and environmental sustainability is something that's incredibly important for us all to remember. I'll move on to our next panelist, who is the very illustrious Caroline May, the chair of the Law Society Climate Change Working Group. She's also a director at the Aldersgate Group and has been listed in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame and the Guide to the World's Leading Environmental Lawyers as well. So I'm sure Caroline's going to offer us some very interesting takes on the role for law and policy in helping professionals support net zero.
Thank you so much. I hope people can hear me. I found a quiet corner in Glasgow, but I'm basking in Glasgow sunshine, so forgive me. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm a partner, I'm the sustainability partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, which is a global law firm. We've got over 50 offices around the world and about 7,000 employees. So this is a very important topic for us, and we're heavily engaged in the arena. I also chair the Law Society Working Group on Climate Change, which is one of the reasons why I was delighted to be invited to take part in this panel today. I endorse everything that Colin and Ethny have already said. The need for collaboration. I started out as an environmental lawyer about 30 years ago, I dare to say, when we were really working with the heavily polluting industries, with the oil and gas industries. This was where the pollution was occurring, and we were responding to toxic torts largely. But even then, there was a need for collaboration with our corporate clients, with our technical consultants, with our engineers, with our chemists, all engaged in trying to devolve best practice, advise clients of regulatory and compliance issues, and solve some of the issues that were occurring, some of the byproducts from heavy industry. I think over the 30 years I've been practicing, there have been a number of changes and nuances. Obviously, the growth of renewables, solar and wind power, particularly in the UK, but now across the world. But I think what really has changed this whole dynamic is the engagement of the financial community. It's the money that is going to drive the change, and some of the pledges that we've had that we heard about from Nick Baker in his opening remarks is really what is going to drive the change for this. The engagement of business, the engagement of our financial institutions and capital, investing in new green technologies and new solutions and dealing with adaptation. So I think we are really coming of age now with this agenda. So what role for professionals? Well, obviously in private practice as a lawyer, I've been advising clients over many years about regulatory and compliance issues, but also about best practice and sharing knowledge across the different sectors and across the different interdisciplinary professionals that I've worked with along the way, now including ESG professionals who are advising clients on corporate reporting and disclosures. So this is a real area of challenge and opportunity for us to collaborate and work together. So what of the legal profession? Well, the Law Society recently published its resolution committing to support climate change and best practice, and to educate and provide a formal education for its members and share the knowledge of those of us who've been specialising in this area with those for whom it may seem something unusual or something far removed from, say, high street practice as a lawyer. So part of our role for the Law Society will be in educating our members as to why this affects their practice, whether you're working in the high street, looking at commercial conveyancing, flood risk, adaptation risk for your clients, or whether you're working in academia, influencing policy and responding to government consultation, or whether you are working in private practice, working with clients both in the heavily polluting industries that have a real challenge to decarbonize, and also looking at the newer technologies, hydrogen, of course, being much discussed at this conference as a new technology and a new fuel source. I think one of the areas, as Colin has picked up, is that resource resilience is now coming into play as well, and recovery and recycling is going to be absolutely critical. So the role of lawyers practice in helping shape the law and the policy that will drive these behaviours, we've got a fantastic opportunity to work together to do that. Also to advise our clients about some of the dangers of greenwashing. We had the International Sustainability Disclosure Board established yesterday in Frankfurt, and there's going to be a real opportunity to work with our clients to use the taxonomies that are being developed to make sure that there's accurate disclosure and reporting. And that there's real guidance. Looking at the younger end of the profession, those entering the legal market now, wanting to establish careers in this area, it's a fantastic opportunity, but we need to make sure that our young professionals are trained and that there's guidance available to them. And one of the issues that is affecting us that we'll be working with in the Law Society is looking at ethical guidance for our lawyers. Should you act for oil companies? Should you act for heavily polluting industries, which now become a hot topic, particularly at the younger end of the profession? And I think our role is to help put that into context, provide ethical guidance within our professional guidance and our SFA responsibilities, SRA responsibilities, to make sure that we can discharge our professional responsibilities, allow access to justice, and also make sure that the rule of law is fair and transparent in this area. It's a massive task. It's a multi-jurisdictional task, but lawyers are shirking their responsibilities if we don't stand up and get involved. And therefore, a number of the organisations that we're involved with through the Law Society, Climate Change Working Group, the Legal Sustainability Alliance, the Chancery Lane Project, which is a pro bono initiatives for lawyers, Lawyers for Net Zero, and the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. There are lots of opportunities for lawyers to become involved, and we'll be urging them to do so. We'll also be urging members of the financial community to join together and join this initiative as well. And there's a real interest and thirst out there to join and to collaborate across all the professional bodies. So together, I think we can be on this journey of change, both for ourselves and our clients, but also for future professionals coming through. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And again, I think we're at risk of having quite violent agreement between all of the panelists today. So hopefully, maybe Klaus, maybe you're going to come in and say that professionals have no role. I'm not sure. So just introducing Klaus de Wael. So he is the president of the Australian Council of Professions, and he has been very kind in getting up, or rather staying up very late to come join us today. He was the CEO, or CIO rather, at one of the largest Australian healthcare corporations for 7 years, and has a kind of wide background of experience across the kind of health sector. So Klaus, over to you for your reflections on the role for professionals.
Yes, thank you very much. And Colin and Ethny and Caroline, I think, have very much taken the view from the various professions. And I'm now going to take things up to the next level, but also upside down, because indeed we are down under in a different time zone and different part of the world. But the issues, of course, here are just the same. And I, again, would wholeheartedly personally, from my professional background, but also on behalf of our members and member organisations, support what my three co-panelists have actually said. So the Australian Council of Professions is the peak body of professional associations in Australia and New Zealand. And we have many members through our 30-member organizations, many professional members in Asia Pacific. And I think that's coming from a peak body point of view, that's, I suppose, an additional dimension. We represent around 1 million professionals in this region. And one of the things that we provide is thought leadership. And that's been something that's, I think, been quite important in the context of the global challenges that we're being faced now. So basically, that's something that I think I just want to say up front. Obviously, the Ipsos poll, I think that Colin mentioned, says that a number of professionals are seen as the trusted leaders, the trusted guides of people in their day-to-day lives regarding medical decisions, regarding financial decisions, regarding legal decisions. Looking at Caroline's association, and I think we've seen that extended into the area of providing thought leadership and guidance in the current pandemic, which is the other crisis we've been dealing with for the last a little bit shorter time, maybe 18 months, nearly 2 years now. So we in this year celebrate our 50th anniversary, and we declared, and this was sort of when the pandemic was still quite new, we declared 2021 as the year of the professions, professionals, and professionalism. And the goal was, of course, to, on behalf of our members, give professionals, I suppose, a little bit of extra profile regarding assisting people and assisting countries, assisting communities, make the right decision based on their evidence-based facts, advice, and science-based advice too, of course. Then, of course, the pandemic came along, especially this year, where it became quite clear that it wasn't quite as simple as we thought. And certainly the general public has seen chief health officers and chief medical officers essentially provide the guidance to governments in very difficult decisions that we've had to make as various societies. So that's something that I think can also now be applied to the issue of global warming and the transition to different economies and all the different aspects that the three previous panelists have actually spoken about. So again, the thought leadership of professionals, advising government, advising individuals what to do in these difficult situations. So essentially, the question is, how do we move forward? How do we progress things? What is the role of professionals? What is the role of professional associations? Because in my role as president of the Australian Council of Professions, I largely speak to the leaders elected and salaried of professional associations, and of course their accountants, their lawyers, their healthcare professionals, their IT professionals, mining professionals, etc., to help them with moving forward the agenda that we've heard here. And of course, Nick was, I think, quite upbeat in showing how much has been achieved in a comparably short amount of time over the last few days at COP26. So that might be a first start of an overview and a contribution to the discourse we're having here today. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Klaus. And I think you're right. Again, I'm sure for everyone in the audience too, a number of questions are bubbling up to the top of my mind. And I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. Just some housekeeping from the panelists. I'm probably going to come to one or two of you first, but if you would like to come in and answer a question, just come in when the person's finished speaking. And to everyone in the audience, again, we have the Slido link. I see some of you are using it now to put questions for the panels forward. I just want to pick up on your point, your last point, Klaus, to kick us off. Obviously, with the pandemic either being nearly over, in the middle, or in full throw, depending on where you are in the world, I think a lot of people, after having spent a lot of time at home over the last year, are rethinking what the future of work looks like for them. And that conversation is also happening at the same time as this momentous COP, where the world is thinking about what next steps are on climate action. So my question to the panelists would really be, what needs to happen to support this professional development away from fossil fuel industries towards green? What can professional bodies do, and what is the role for government in taking this forward? So Klaus, maybe I'll go to you first on that one.
Well, thank you, Heather, because one observation we've made, certainly down under, and I'm not quite sure if that's the same in your jurisdiction, but what we've observed over the last 20 years, and I have personally been working with Australian federal and state governments and New Zealand governments and Malaysian governments and Hong Kong government and the Singapore government in matters of healthcare. What I've observed and what our member organizations tell us is governments have increasingly denuded themselves of expertise. 20 years ago, there was basically quite a lot of expertise still in government departments. Today, we find very little. So the question is, who advises governments what to do? Who requires policy? And when you look around, the only resource that's really available are professionals. So what we've seen is professionals step up, and of course the pandemic is a good example, step up at fairly short notice to provide policy input to governments at various levels in society. So that's one thing. Maybe an additional answer, bonus answer there on the future of work. The other observation we've made is, and this again has some impact interestingly on the carbon footprint, is there's been a cultural change we've observed in our jurisdictions, certainly in the knowledge worker areas, that makes remote working, which makes the dependency of traveling to clients, to students, to whatever, not as important as it used to be. It's now quite acceptable to engage with new clients remotely, to teach remotely, etc., which means, especially in a country that's very much, if you like, dominated by distance. We fly around Australia used to fly around Australia on a daily basis, like other people take a bus or a train. Huge carbon footprint implications. We've seen that actually change. The culture has changed. It's now acceptable. And thought leader professionals and knowledge worker professionals are taking the lead and showing government, interestingly, that you can actually effectively work as a knowledge worker without having to physically travel. And there's some calculations which are being made at the moment, what that means for the carbon footprint. But that's certainly somewhere where professionals are actually leading by example, saying, hey, you don't need to travel to work. You don't need to sit in the city of, say, Sydney or Melbourne or London or Frankfurt or wherever in a cubicle. You can actually do that without having to physically travel, which culturally was not really that acceptable until about the middle of last year. So there you go. There's a bonus answer too, Heather.
Thank you so much, Klaus. Would anyone else on the panel like to come in on that question? Potentially Ethny, with a youth focus on how we support young people in accessing professional development.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this charter that's going to be really interesting and in terms of professional bodies is, as Colin outlined, one of the aims of the charter is to empower and inspire our members to drive sustainable growth, which includes the development of jointly providing a set of common CPD tools and principles. And this charter will provide a forum for professional bodies to share best practice in terms of building sustainability into CPD resources, as well as helping to develop a common language in this area, which I think is going to be really key. And to inform the development of CPD, I'd also say that what's really important is that we need to, our members are the experts. They know what they don't know or where they need help and where they need assistance. So I think going to our members first, asking them what they need help in, And then connecting with the other professional bodies that are signed up to this charter can mean that we can really fulfill those CPD opportunities, and in a way that truly is multidisciplinary and takes into account more than just, you know, one sector focus. So I think that's going to be a really valuable part of this charter.
That's a very interesting observation, Ethny, because the CPD was something that people and professionals used to do at conference, etc., and often used to travel. We know from, you know, our two organizations who actually cover the accountancy profession, about 150,000 accountancy professionals in Australia, New Zealand, etc. They have very clearly already stated, and this is already going back a few months, their strong preference, each individually, that they want to do CPD remotely. So basically, they have already transitioned from from face-to-face to remote CPD, CPE, and that's already happening right now as we speak.
Fantastic. I think that's, yeah, very, very interesting points as well. And I think it really is, I mean, speaking at least with the youth lens, I think we now see a really strong demand from young people to work in industries that are aligned with their values. Caroline, I see you might want to come in.
Yeah, just to say that one of the things we'll be looking at for lawyers in our profession is our professional training, our professional conduct rules, and for our younger lawyers coming through getting their solicitors finals training, one of the things that the Law Society will be looking at in conjunction with the Solicitors Regulation Authority is if there should be a compulsory climate change module as part of the young lawyers development and training. It's an optional course at the moment, but we're looking at whether there should be some fundamental training so that all lawyers, wherever they end up working and whatever discipline they enter, have a basic understanding of the principles and some of the issues for lawyers around climate change. I mentioned the ethical issue at the beginning. There are also access to justice. There are going to be a lot more issues to consider with the taxonomies and the disclosure and reporting rules. There's also going to be issues around greenwashing, fraud. There's a lot of litigation coming out of the States at the moment and challenges to what some of the corporates are saying about what they're doing. There are also issues around carbon trading and allowances and mis-selling and undervaluing of carbon assets. That is going to grow that whole area and become more complex. And for professionals advising in the law and the administration of the law, they need to have a basic understanding, whether you end up as a banking lawyer or an environmental lawyer or an immigration and communities lawyer, you will need to have a basic framework of this. It's what frames our society. And law generally follows societal issues as a problem arises. The legal profession and lawyers and governments then look for a policy solution or ultimately a regulatory solution. So I think there's a strong case and a strong argument, and that's what we'll be working on with our professional bodies to provide some mandatory training at the outset. So every solicitor that qualifies can no longer say, I don't understand this, I don't know anything about it, it doesn't affect my practice. It's a fundamental part of their training, and I think it'll be a very popular course with our younger lawyers coming through.
Thanks, Caroline. This is very interesting. A quick follow-up from me. Do you think that's sufficient for, or that those mechanisms are sufficient to enable professionals to hold the companies they work for to account on issues like greenwash?
I think that to have a fundamental understanding of it, first of all, prevents anybody saying they don't know or they don't understand or they don't see why it matters. And I suspect with our young lawyer cohort coming through, they're all very educated, they're all very well aware and fairly astute individuals. So I think they understand that, but it's giving them the tools. And I think various of our legal professional bodies, the LSA, for example, and the Chancery Lane Project, what you're seeing is the younger demographic saying to challenging senior management, saying, what are we doing in this context? Are we setting net zero targets? Our clients are asking us. As sustainability partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, I'm often interviewed by clients on panel pitches and bids, not because my work is going to be central to the engagement of our practice, but because our clients are saying we won't engage a law firm that doesn't have proper sustainability principles, hasn't set net zero targets, hasn't signed up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So there's a mixture of it's coming bottom up and top down, if you like. So even those in the middle who may think it's nothing to do with their practice or their clients, it's coming from both ends. And I think the engagement of the financial community and financial professionals, and I've been talking and engaging with a number of people from that community during COP in Glasgow, there's an enormous thirst in that community as well to understand how they can play a role. So I think all the drivers are in place there, and it's giving professionals in whatever discipline they come from the tools to see it. If you're an environmental professional or an engineer, you're perhaps at the harder end of this and you've been involved for a long time. If you've been practicing, I don't know, corporate law or some other type of law, you may not see how that affects your business and how that affects your clients and what role you can play. So I think education and engagement is key. And when you look at the role of law and the role of lawyers, you see what an enormous opportunity there is for lawyers to engage in a balanced argument. So that I know there are some who feel that lawyers should be climate lobbyists. There are others who feel that lawyers should not be, and that we should maintain that access to justice and best practice. And that's why we have a critical role to find out where our place is, but then to work with others. So I think all law firms will be being asked this question. All our management will be being asked this question. And you know, those of us at the forefront of it will have an opportunity to share best practice and to share learnings across the profession and engage with other networks.
Heather,
come in close.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on three things, Caroline, that you said. Firstly, of course, the bottom up and the top down, which is quite fascinating. So from the bottom up regarding young people, what we're seeing is that large employers, and some of you might know Atlassian, but we also have a large presence of Google and Twitter and Facebook in our country. Those corporations have already said, we don't actually need you to come into the office anymore. Atlassian has said, we don't actually want people working in cubicles anymore. That's, you know, we've moved on from that. And young people, that really gels with them and they're loving it, because in the past that was something which was not, if you like, acceptable. It is now acceptable. From the top down, an observation, again, I'm talking a little bit about more implementing the things we've been talking about in this panel session and making it happen. From the top down, I serve on our Immigration Minister's Advisory Council for Skilled Migration, and if you obviously appreciate, you know, skilled migration of professionals is an important topic in our country. And the minister comes to us, and I represent the professions. The minister comes to us seeking advice and saying, how, in the light of COVID, in the light of global warming, in the light of climate change, how can I restructure our immigration policy, Australia's immigration policies, to meet the current and future needs of specifically the cohorts of professionals? So again, this is something that's already happening, and this might be also something that might work for some of the other countries that are represented here on the session here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Klaus. I've got one more question for myself, and then I'm going to move over to the Q&A. I know we've got a couple of things in the Zoom Q&A, which I would advise if you'd like to answer them live, you're welcome to, panelists. Otherwise, we can answer them verbally. So Colin, obviously at this COP, a number of issues have been on the agenda, especially for civil society, and one of them is greenwash. There is a lot of controversy about existing and fossil fuel intensive industries, and how credible net zero commitments are from those industries to get us to meet their own net zero commitments. Obviously, there's a huge number of professionals who work in these industries too. So from you, Colin, how do we make sure that professionals in these legacy industries and these extractive industries can be supported in transitioning away from brown and towards green? So
I think the first thing to distinguish between is those industries which might truly be considered to be legacy or going to be legacy, and those which are currently heavily polluting but are still going to be essential for the foreseeable future. So, for example, we're going to need steel. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to build wind turbines to the scale that we need, or whatever else you want to do in terms of technology. So the issue there is, how do we help the professionals gain the skills necessary to be able to do the work to decarbonize those processes? First of all, make them more energy efficient, and then decarbonize. And there's a lot of work going on to try and achieve that kind of aim in those heavy industries, the foundation industries, as we call them here in the UK. So there, it's really about supporting those people, and that's classic professional body learned society activity. It's making sure people have access to the technical information. It's making sure people can connect in networks so that they can learn and develop and pull together their expertise. And then I think for those industries which really are sunsetting, there it's a question of, how do you support those individuals to transfer those skills elsewhere? And I think I mentioned a bit about this before. And again, so if you're one of my volunteers spends about half of their time worrying about oil well integrity, and the rest of their time worrying about turning them into carbon capture and storage facilities. And it used to be all about oil well integrity, and I bet in 5 years' time it's all about carbon capture and storage. And that's a wonderful example in one individual of the transition that is there. And there, I think there's a role for professional bodies to support that. I think also employers and governments have a big role in that as well. But professional bodies have a huge role to try and support people in doing that. And I think in terms of the sort of the greenwash space that you started off with, I think I'd reflect back precisely what Caroline was saying earlier. Empowering members to understand what is greenwash and what is not makes it more likely that they'll be able to have that conversation internally and change from a less good to a better position within a company or an organization. And giving them the support, the network, the moral support, if you like, of their fellow professionals to have those conversations, again, is something that as professional bodies, I think we are uniquely placed to do.
Thanks, Colin. I think that was a really helpful answer for everyone in the audience. We've spoken a lot today about education and empowerment as a way to ensure that we have credible net zero commitments. So I see a question in the Q&A from Christine Ann Davies. I think relating to just quite where we think education should begin on these issues. So should it be at the professional level, or should this education start happening in schools, colleges and universities? I see Klaus, you might want to answer this one first.
Oh, simple answer, all, at all levels. You know, it starts with behavioral change, you know, in, if you like, maybe even preschool. Behavioral changes of understanding, caring for the environment, seeing that wastage is not a desirable thing, etc., of any resources, right through to, if you like, senior professionals who are leading their professions along the lines that we've been talking, you know, for the last hour or so. So I would say at all levels.
I see some nodding. Caroline, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I would agree with what Klaus has just said, but actually, as the mother of a teenage boy, I'm not sure that the school children are the ones that need the education. I think they are already energized and enthused. I think some perhaps translation of that into their everyday world. They all watch David Attenborough, they all want to save the turtles and so on. And then when I walk down our lane in the evening, the amount of litter which I pick up every day dutifully and bring home, and it's there again the following day, makes me realize that there's still a lot of work to do in translating caring for your environment, meaning caring for your immediate environment. When I tell my son to switch his Xbox off because he's used too much electricity that day, the NIMBY comes out. So I think where the debate is, it's not about raising consciousness at the younger end, it's about interpretation and adapting that to the real world, because they will be tomorrow's professionals and tomorrow's consumers. So keep buying telephones, keep buying new trainers, etc. It's an understanding of that. So I think that's where the maturity of the education comes at that end. I actually think there's almost a case for reverse education at the senior end. It's some of our senior leaders, senior professionals and senior managers who are at the apex of their organizations some of whom I think do pay lip service to this agenda, but actually don't really understand it or don't really feel that it matters, that making money for their organization is more important. And I think that's the area where a more sophisticated discussion needs to come in. And that's where the alignment, I think, of the financial institutions is really integral to this, because if the money will talk, if you like, the money will drive behavioral change, and all the larger institutions and large corporations will therefore sort of get on board with it, because they'll see it as good business. And that's what we have to do, is have a different value set. So good business is good environmental and climate transition business. And that's what produces the money, and ethical investment is going to be a key part of that. And that's really, for me, what I see COP doing, is bringing those leaders together and engaging in a public way to commitment. Then we move to the next stage, which is implementation of those commitments. And that's where we all have a role to hold our leaders to those commitments that they make. So education for everyone, but potentially different types of education in different ways. I've already said what I think for the legal profession that we will be looking at in terms of this on professional qualification.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So I think a relevant question I can see from, I'm combining some on the Slido, from Laura Marshall and some anonymous contributors, is exactly where this conversation around education and re-education fits within the professional body's charter on climate action. Is this re-education bit the main value add of the charter? And what's the difference between joining the charter, and what's the value of joining the charter, as opposed to just coming up with your own sustainability strategy within your own sector? So Colin or Ethny, I know you've been heavily involved from the beginning. I'm sure you'll want to take that question first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to speak to it quickly, and then, yeah, Colin, I'll pass over to you. Well, I think the main thing is, in terms of, I mean, from a professional body viewpoint, obviously we've got, our membership spans different levels of seniority. So we'll need a bit of both. We'll need a bit of the reskilling, depending on the type of sector that you're working in, but also the upskilling for those people that are entering the workforce. And we can also try and assist that through our links with educational institutes and try and get those sustainable principles embedded within education. But we also need to be focused on providing professional development opportunities and guidance to our members who are already, in like higher up in their profession, so that they can be reskilled and have all of those skills that they really need. And as I said before, it's going to be so important to go to them and ask what they feel they need and are lacking in terms of their net zero skills. And then in terms of the value added from joining the charter, I mean, it means you won't be an isolated voice, and you'll be doing action that's aligned with everyone else. You can tap into this vast amount of knowledge that all the signatories will have. I mean, as I said in my talk earlier, is, not everyone has all the answers. We need to be able to tap into all the different sectors in order to really come up with multifunctional solutions that can actually take in systems thinking. Otherwise, you'll just be isolated and you won't be able to tap into that knowledge, and you won't be aligned and have that collective narrative that's going to be much more effective at pushing change forward.
Thank you so much, Ethny. Colin, I might ask you to comment, and actually what would be really helpful is if you had any specific examples to bring this idea of the value of interdisciplinary conversations to light.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with what Ethny said again. I should stop letting Ethny speak first because she keeps on saying what I would have said. I think that the charter and having your own approach is not, or shouldn't be seen as an either or, in the sense that there will be things that are unique to any one particular professional body. So, for example, there's another question in the chat from Nick Turton at the Energy Institute saying, what do I do about my members who work in high emitting industries if I want to make this change? And that's an issue that the Energy Institute has and the IOM3 has, but it's not an issue that the IES has, for example, really. So, there'll be different nuances for each organization because of the nature of its membership and the nature of the areas that it's in that you need to worry about yourself. But that added value and that cooperative working, I think, is really important. And so, for example, we, IOM3 and IES, are both members of a grouping called the Environmental Policy Forum, which operates under the auspices of the Society for the Environment. and it brings together engineers like my members with environmental scientists like Ethny's members and other people. And we try and look at different issues from those different perspectives and come up with some interesting alternative ways of thinking about it. And I think Ethny's nodding, we find that a very valuable way of sharing some of that interdisciplinary understanding and knowledge. And there'll be some areas, some topics where, for example, Ethny and her people will have a much better understanding than me and mine, and vice versa. But we learn from each other and we support and we move forward. And having the forum that the Charter should be giving us will make that a lot easier for a lot more people to do. And again, you know, the expertise of people like Caroline and the Law Society on the legal aspects is something that neither Ethny nor my members have. And law underpins so much of what we're trying to do. So there's so many ways in which I think that already shows, but increasingly can. And I bet Klaus and ACOP has a lot more because they already bring that together in a much more formalistic way.
Well, thank you for the forward pass there, Colin, because I was just saying, and this was inspired by, I think, some wording in the Charter, is we've actually set up a professional bodies forum for climate action, which is auspiced and, if you like, facilitated by the Australian Council of Professions, but goes beyond our members. So first it includes all our members, but then also other professional associations, and there are professional associations who are not members in Australia and New Zealand, but basically provides, if you like, an organisation neutral forum where exactly that exchange that Colin mentioned, you know, with lawyers, with other organisations, with entities who may not be professional associations directly, but have passion for the subject matter, can get together and discuss and plan and scheme and, if you like, facilitate and progress the various aspects of the work that we need to do that we've been discussing today.
Thank you, Klaus. Caroline, do you want to come in?
Yeah, we started mentioning collaboration. So I think one of the key things for the Charter bodies is that ability to collaborate. In my years of practice looking at environmental situations and remediation and repurposing type situations, it's been absolutely essential to work alongside engineers, chemical engineers, environmental consultants, hydrogeologists. There has not been a solution that hasn't involved that multidisciplinary working. So it's an absolute no-brainer when you're looking at real world and you're looking at projects or you're looking at development. You need a whole set of skills. And therefore, I think Charter membership and collaboration across those professional bodies is no more than a reflection of the work that is already ongoing and has been for some time, but it brings it together. And I think it makes us a much more powerful voice, all these professional people working at the centre, committed to the same principles, sharing best practice. I've learned an awful lot from working. My chemistry teacher would be amazed at my grasp of chemistry now. It was fairly poor at school, but you learn such a lot from working alongside in a multidisciplinary way. It's much more enjoyable, and also it brings the client a solution much faster than us all working in our silos. So I think collaboration is key. I think membership gives you a community, it gives you support, it gives you networking opportunity, which you wouldn't have otherwise, and very powerful voice if all these different professions are joining together. And I'd like to see more engagement from more professional bodies as well, joining up to the Charter and moving the agenda forwards.
So I think that's a pretty resounding call from all the panelists to get involved in the Charter. So that's brilliant to hear. I know there's some questions in the Q&A specifically to what joining the Charter actually means for an organisation. So I see a question from Phil Underwood, and I'm going to pose this as a slightly adapted version to the panelists. So for each of you, perhaps starting with Caroline, what's your top recommendation for new Charter signatories to focus on? What should they be prioritising when they think about joining the Charter?
I think, speaking from my own experience with the Law Society, it's working with my own body, first of all, and understanding where we are as a profession, and then providing that guidance and framework, and then explaining and reaching out, which is kind of what I've done in my communications with E3G, it is reaching out across outside of our sort of solicitors and legal framework, reaching out across that framework to make contact with E3G, make contact with other panelist organizations, many of whom we've been working with anyway, but it's given us a voice and a channel of communication. So what I would say is, if you're thinking about joining and signing up, first look at what your own professional body is doing, get that house in order first and make sure that the direction of travel is alignable, and then start reaching out across the professions, because it gives you a great body and a great network to collaborate with.
Thanks, Caroline. Ethny, we'll go to you. What's your top recommendation for people who are thinking about joining the Charter?
My top recommendation is go to your members, find out what they need, where they feel that they need support, and then connect with other signatories of the Charter. You'll find areas of synergy, possible conflict, and then you can develop that aligned resources, collective narrative, which will help you actually, create the resources that your membership needs. And anyone that is worried because they're not sure how they could fulfill some of the Charter commitments, what I would really highlight is we are all going to have to get to net zero. That's something that we're going to have to all do. And actually joining the Charter, it will provide you with resources to help you do this. So if it's even more of a reason to join if you're concerned that you don't know how you're going to do it, because you can tap into all these resources, as Caroline was saying. That's my top tip.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ethny. Klaus, I'll go to you.
Sorry, yes, exactly. Firstly, look sideways to your peer professional association, maybe through a professional bodies forum, which we've set up for the region here down under. And I'm going to post the link into the chat shortly. See what the other organizations, other professional associations have done, and then apply that learning to the leadership of your member, as leaders, as thought leaders to your member professions.
And Colin.
Yeah, I think so. One of the downsides of an event like today is that you've got 4 panelists who are pretty passionate about this and whose organizations have been thinking about this for some time in one shape or form or another. And the risk is that gives you the sense that that's where you need to be before you can come on board. And that's not true. Yeah. So my actual answer, what's the first thing you need to do is become a supporter, and then engage with us, and then use the network that you'll get through that to help you do the things that Ethny, Caroline and Klaus have talked about, to look at different things, understand what your members need and want, and how you can approach it. I think that we are at risk of allowing the best to be the enemy of the good, of people thinking, well, I can't sign this thing because I'm not already in that space. Well, no, this is a device to help you get into that space.
Excellent. And Colin, just to confirm, do you have to have a net zero commitment as an organisation to join the Charter?
You don't have to. What I would say is that you probably ought to have one anyway. And if you haven't got one, then joining as a supporter in the first instance is a good way of getting access to some of the ways of getting to that. I imagine that Phil Underwood has just posted something about the Pledge to Net Zero, which is an environmental services pledge to net zero. There's the SME Climate Hub, which is a good place in the UK to get access to more resources and understanding. So, there are a number of places and ways to do it. But to be honest, I'd be gobsmacked if any organisation isn't already thinking about doing something. And if they're not yet, I bet your members will be asking you to do it pretty soon. So if you haven't, get your skates on, and the Charter and the people involved in the Charter can help.
Well, thanks, Colin. I think we've got time for one more question, actually. Given I'm in Glasgow, I feel like it's remiss to not mention the significance of this COP26 and really hammer home the idea that it's evident from the places in the world that are currently on fire, and the vast change we've seen across the world in climatic conditions, that action needs to happen now on climate change. So what I'd ask to the panelists as a final question is basically a portmanteau of a few that we've seen in the Slido. How do we hold ourselves accountable as professional bodies on our net zero commitments, on our membership of the Charter? And how are we going to maintain progress and increase ambition after COP? So I'll let anyone who wants to come in and take that.
It's a big question. I'll leap in. It's a big question. I think accountability has got to be key. As we saw in Paris, there were lots of declarations made, but keeping the focus on accountability and delivery is going to be absolutely critical at policy and political level. And I think that's been one of the new features of this COP. And I've heard a number of demonstrations outside while I've been sitting inside in various places here. It's the groundswell from the bottom up that citizens, I think in many ways, are ahead of our political leaders in this agenda. And therefore keeping that pressure and that accountability will be critical. Implementation and delivery, and I pick up on what Colin said, demonizing people who've been working in heavy carbonized industries is not going to help. That's not part of the solution. Helping the transition is what's absolutely critical, and using our skills to do so. When we saw that there were going to be petrol shortages in the UK recently, you saw the importance of oil and of petrol still in our society. And therefore it's got to be a balanced debate, but it's moving that transition forward. So it's accountability, it's working on the transition together and not demonizing people in this argument, I believe anyway. And then it's having a methodology of taxonomy and reporting and disclosure that is viable and auditable and independent, so that whether you're an investor or a consumer, you can see that what you're investing in and buying lives up to the green credentials that are claimed for that particular product. And I think having a taxonomy and a disclosure, a sustainability disclosure reporting system that is referable across the world and across different economies and different stages of development will be absolutely critical. So this debate needs to mature. We need to not evangelize as such, but we need to keep on working in that direction of travel and keep the pressure on.
I think I agree with everything that Caroline said in the sort of the macro sense. I think in terms of professional bodies, I'd take a couple of those themes and I'd apply them to us. I think, first of all, setting up a dynamic where you commit to being transparent to your members is really important. And it's the equivalent of that sort of global reporting and anti-greenwashing. And, you know, establishing climate action plans, which is part of the commitment in the Charter, for example, but just generally being transparent to your members about both what you're doing with your own operations, but also what you're doing to support the wider conversation. Because that transparency will kind of hold your feet to the fire over time. And I think that's an important point.
I would agree. I think transparency is key, and the climate action plans that Colin mentioned, and also thinking about science-based targets to make sure that your transition to net zero is based on science, I think is really key, and it helps with accountability. And maintaining momentum post-COP is so important. I think we need to make sure that we see this COP as the beginning and not the end of the journey, even though we've been doing so much work in the run-up. This is just the beginning. We really do need to take what is decided here and make that into tangible actions. And hopefully the Charter will, be a really important part of that. So yeah, science-based targets and keeping that momentum going, I think, is really key.
Klaus, do you want to offer any thoughts?
Would certainly agree. I think important with Colin, not demonizing, but bring everybody with us. And certainly in our fancy footwork over the last few weeks, we've made very sure that that basically different organizations, different professions will be at different parts or places in the journey, and we need to bring them all with us. Hence, the distinction between interested organization, supporting organization, and signatory organization. I think, and we're very, if you like, sanguine about that, as long as a professional organisation is moving in the right direction. I think that's important. And also leading by example. We have, interestingly, and there's a bit of a nudge from our corporate regulators happening already in Australia, but we have put a climate sustainability statement in our annual reports, I think, for the last 2 years. So we, as the Australian Council of Professions, being an incorporated body, are leading by example and reporting and being accountable how we implement, if you like, sustainability in our very own organisation.
Well, what a good note to leave us on. I'd just like to say thank you to all of the amazing panelists we've had today: Nick Baker, Ethny Childs, Colin Church, Caroline May, and Klaus Vale. I think they've really hammered home the 3 T's that I've taken away, which is transparency, training, and teaching each other about best practice on getting to net zero. So I think that's a really powerful message to pause with. I'd also just like to note that if you do have any follow-up questions, please do email the link that's been put in the chat. Feel free to tweet about today's session. And frankly, sign up as a supporter because it's a fantastic initiative. Thank you very much to everyone who attended today, and I hope you have a good rest of your COP. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.